Hi, it's Dave T here, and as a lot of you know, I film a lot of remote campsites for my YouTube channel, and to do that I use a fair amount of camera and other technology kit, including a laptop, to perform the draft edit of the video prior to leaving and going back home. A lot of these campsites are fairly remote and do not have access to mains power, so today I thought I would run through 7 simple tips on how to power and charge technology devices whilst out and about where you do not have access to ready power. And some of these tips will particularly relate to people in motorhomes and caravans where they have at least a 12-volt supply, but equally it will apply to anybody that's at least based in some kind of vehicle with a 12-volt supply. So without further ado, let's look at how you power technology when you're in the middle of nowhere, such as here. So one of the most common suggestions for powering devices when you only have a 12-volt power supply is to use an inverter. Now an inverter takes a 12-volt power input and converts it to a standard mains 240-volt power output. So they are somewhat of a catch-all in terms that they will power most devices. However, it's worth bearing in mind that firstly, in terms of efficiency, they're only something like 85% efficient. So the actual power you need to have in your 12-volt battery supply needs to be greater, because you're going to lose some of it purely in the conversion to 240 volts. The second thing is, from a convenience point of view, the cost of inverters, whilst not prohibitive, does mean that you're unlikely to have lots of them. So if you need to power multiple devices or charge multiple devices at the same time, then you could be limited in that way also. The third thing is, whilst you can get higher output inverters, possibly with two 240 volt sockets on them as opposed to one, those higher powered inverters do actually require a direct connection to the battery, as opposed to working off of a 12-volt cigarette lighter connection, where the cables for a standard 12-volt cigarette connection won't have the capacity to carry the current required for the larger inverter. So this will mean that you may have to connect your inverter to the actual battery directly via crocodile clips and so on, and that might not be as convenient to do depending on your circumstances. So whilst inverters are a good catch-all and it's useful to have one around, they're not necessarily perfect in all ways, and there are some better solutions which we'll move on to next. Devices will often just come with a mains power supply or charger, but with a little research you can often find either 12-volt or USB equivalent replacement chargers, such as this USB charger for a Canon battery system, or this 12-volt based charger for a Dyson vacuum. It's worth looking for USB chargers wherever possible, purely because this means you can plug them in either via an adapter into a 12-volt socket, or you can charge devices off of a USB power pack. Larger electronic devices such as laptops and tablets typically have mains power supplies, but if you are looking to work off-grid, and if you're in the market for a new laptop or tablet, then try to find one that can be charged via USB, typically via USB-C. If you do have a device which can be charged by USB-C, then it's worth considering what you're going to be plugging it into, since just a USB-C cable may not work. So for example, with this Dell laptop, if we plug it into a standard 12-volt to USB adapter and a standard USB to USB-C cable, then we get this rather alarming warning message, which most importantly tells us it's not going to be charging the device. However, if we get an alternative adapter with specific USB-C ports and chips inside to negotiate the power delivery, then instead we get this message, which, while still not perfect, does mean the device is going to charge. So basically, when looking at any USB-C powered device, you need to look at specific cables and 12-volt to USB adapters, which are going to then be compliant with your device. Unfortunately, the USB-C standard, whilst the standard itself is set in stone, some of different devices such as laptops, the way they utilize it to power their devices is somewhat fluid, so you're probably going to either have to research or just trial and error in terms of what works best for you. One other important thing to bear in mind is that most USB-C devices, whilst they may not like an incorrect power supply for running, will typically charge off of USB-C when not running. So one option is to use the device purely on its internal battery, and then when you've finished, then charge it up after when you're not using it. If you do try to use it whilst on a USB-C power supply which is not adequate, then very often the device will switch into a power saving mode, which may disable certain things like advanced graphics adapters, causing you problems if you're doing things such as editing video. So this is a fairly simple one that people often forget, in that if you have a device which can have removable batteries, then try to buy as many spare batteries as possible. This has two advantages. First is that you may just not run out depending on the length of your trip and amount of work you're doing. Secondly, when you do have access to power, then you can charge as many batteries as possible in one go to replenish your supply. If you have devices which do not have removable batteries but are USB chargeable, then the option there is to go for USB power packs and have as many of those as possible. Again, it's really a question of being able to stock up on power so that you can both recharge and use it as you are able to. So when you're off-grid, there's nothing better than free power when the sun is shining. But apart from adding additional panels to your solar panel system, one thing you might like to consider is if you currently have a basic charge controller with just a few LEDs showing whether it's charging or not charging, then you could consider getting an upgrade to a more advanced charger, which is not that expensive, but it does give you a lot more information, such as the input voltage, the current battery voltage, and also the condition of the battery, and this can help you decide when you want to draw power from the system and when it's best to leave it to charge up again. You can also look at MPPT controllers, which are somewhat more efficient, especially in shady or dull conditions, but they're relatively expensive and you may not find they're worth the upgrade. So particularly if you're going to be off-grid for some time, then you need to consider charging devices whenever possible. The most obvious of these is if you take a journey in a car, when it's a perfect opportunity to charge, especially small devices in the car, and at least give them the top up. Also, if you're running on a solar powered system, then consider the best time to charge your devices. So typically if it's in the morning or running up to midday, once the main battery on the van or the car is fully charged by the solar power, then the power coming in from the sun is not really going to be any use because there's nowhere to put it because the battery is always full. So in that situation, if you're charging devices, if you charge them up in the morning to midday, and then by the end of the day, the battery will be then full for the evening. Also try to avoid charging large devices overnight because it may deplete the battery to such an extent where you run into problems where you need to power other devices which are essential overnight. And finally, when buying new devices, always try and buy the most power efficient devices that you can. So for example, an LED based TV is approximately 20 to 30% more efficient than a non-LED based version. And a switch to LED based lights can actually save you up to 85% compared to a halogen. And they can be. So I hope you found this video useful. We've actually now on our 10th night away with no mains power, during which time I've created, filmed and edited about 5 videos, all without any kind of mains power and all on battery and solar power. So it can actually be done, and these tips do actually work. Hope they work for you. If you found this video useful, then please hit that like button. And if you'd like to see some more of the videos that I create, then please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting the bell button for notification. As always, thanks for watching. Oh, sod it. Light's gone.